Let's go with this one. Once it generates a layer that you like, you just click on download. And you'll see that at the bottom here it says generate dynamic lighting. Since we've already picked Fantasy Grounds, let's click on that. It can take a little bit depending on the size of the map. So let's wait there for a second. There you go. You'll see that we have both files here. The JPEG file, and we also have an XML that has all the walls information, the line of sight definitions. Now let's hop over to Fantasy Grounds. And here it's actually pretty simple to import a DunGen. You'll need two of these folders. We need the images, and we also need the assets here at the bottom. Here on the assets, we'll go into, let's click on folder. It's going to open the campaign folder. Let's erase these old ones. You'll see that we're in the Destiny LOS campaign / images. Now we'll go to downloads that I got before, these two, and we'll copy them and paste them here. After that, it's just a matter of refreshing, going into campaign, and here's the DunGen. You'll see that these two have the exact same name. That is very important, otherwise this is not going to work. The ones you download from DunGen already have it, but just make sure they have the same name. With that, we'll just drag it and drop it from the assets into the images. And that will give you a map ready to go. It's this is of course not necessary, but we'll drop a character here so that we can sit up. Over there. There you go. You'll see that the lighting has already been applied. We check on the walls. Everything seems to be in place here. And it is literally that simple to import the DunGen from DunGen.app onto Fantasy Grounds. The caves work exactly the same way. We'll go over them in just a second. Let's go here to the caves. The main difference here is that the layout looks a little bit weird at the beginning. The reason for this is so that it generates much faster and you have an idea of what it's going to look like. As when we download it, actually applies the theme. We can generate different types of caves, something with a large area. We can have large rooms like this ones, or we can have small rooms as well. Of course, here we have the same pixel density as well for the other ones, 30, 50, 70, and 100 per tile, per cell. Themes, at the moment there's only one for the caves. It's actually a pretty new tool. We'll be adding more very soon. And we have a few advanced options here. We have a corridor density that's going to connect even more rooms. You'll see here that usually every room is connected only once to another one. Increasing this will make that quite of a maze with many more corridors and so on. The peripheral egress is how many exits there are to the cave. There's only one at this point. And let's go here to Fantasy Grounds and download this one. That once it downloads, it's going to apply the theme to it as well. And just like the other one, we'll generate the dynamic lighting at the bottom. Okay. Let's do the same thing as we did before. So open the downloads here and move these new images over to the campaign images folder. We already had it open, so let's close this one. We'll refresh here, and you'll see that we have the cave here now. Let's drop it over to the images, all the way from assets to images. That creates the map. Let's drop a character again. They're always out of bounds. We're disabling here the line of sight so that they can cross over to the... and you can see that the lighting has been applied as well. The thing with caves, though, is that it does generate many more points, so you have to be a little bit careful with Fantasy Grounds on the size of the map. If we go to the walls, you'll see that there are plenty more nodes than the other one. At this size, it tends to work quite well, in my experience. But you do have to be a little bit careful about that. But that is as simple as it gets. Takes just, as you can see, just a minute or two, and you can generate a layout for either a dungeon or a cave and import it onto Fantasy Grounds. The only thing you still need to do is populate it with either monsters or environmental hazards characters and so on, and you're ready to play. And I think that's about it for the demonstration. The last tool is the dynamic lighting, as I mentioned, but as this one's quite a bit more complex to use, we'll just point you towards the video here that explains quite well how to use it. And I believe that's it, Laren. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
You said you want to use for Fantasy Grounds. Can you go back to the?
Yeah.
Yep. So when you're using Fantasy Grounds, I don't mind using the standard 70 pixels for Unity, but when it comes to the actual maximum size, I think small or smaller is the best. And if you look at the bottom of when you generate that, if you look at the bottom, you see where it says tiles 33 by 38. You generally want to keep that like around 30 by 30. And that's just for dimensions and such. The other thing is that the larger the image, the more you're going to have to scroll in and out when you're working with the map. So keeping the map sizes a little bit smaller is very important with Fantasy Grounds. The other thing is, having you have themes that can be applied to the main dungeon tile part, and that you have the ability to download the line of sight, and you can keep the seed as he has shown up there, that 95207. That number is also part of the file name. So if you forget what the seed number was, the actual file name will have that seed implanted into it. So you can regenerate this, or like if you have a friend that wants the same map, you just give them that seed number, and when they come to the tool, they can plug that in and generate the same map. So it's kind of handy in that regard. So that's pretty cool. I like that. So this gives you the ability to import it into a map tool and kind of work with it as a kind of a template. And there's your old school maps. So those will come to the cavern soon, correct?
Not necessarily the same ones. I believe the old school is going to be there for sure. Probably the paper style as well.
Okay. That's great.
But I'm actually working on a sort of lava volcanic cave right now.
Nice. I like it. So that is a tool that can be used outside of Fantasy Grounds to kind of help speed up the process if you don't want to put in the line of sight. You still have to put the doors in and such, but at least that gives you a good starting point, and it's randomized. So if you need something really quick, it doesn't take you an hour to do it. You can just generate this, throw a couple doors in there, and go with it. So that's a really cool tool. I really appreciate you coming on here and showing us this. And just to let you know that Nick and I have been working together a little bit off and on for about a year. And he's provided Fantasy Grounds Academy, used to be college, with a special password. And also I can generate for up to 10 users to check out the tool and teach you guys. So if you're interested after this class, you can PM me if you want to check it out some more. But that's very generous. He made a whole separate thing for us so we can interface with this. But generally, you go through the patron, and that will be on the description of the video at the end. So if you guys are interested in joining the patron, it's not that much money, and you get this tool and the ability to use the line of sight. I think it's great for homebrew and for on the fly generator tool. And the last tool that he showed would be very helpful for developers. So if you're someone who like Cobalt Press or somebody that has an artist, an in-house artist, and you want to generate the line of sight, if you have the mask for it, you can generate that, and it will help pick up the lines for you so that you're able to quickly generate the line of sight and cut down some of your production time. So if you have just the black and white mask for a map that's going to be colorized, you can use that as your template in another program, and you can bring it into this program here. You can choose a file, and it'll try its best to mask it off or to put the lines in for you. So yeah, there's all the coloring and the details for it. So again, this tool is not just for throwing the map into Fantasy Grounds, which most of us do, but it also would help with developers. And I think this is a good step in the right direction, Nick.
Correct. This tool is indeed mainly geared towards the content creators, map cartographers, and so on. I do have several of my patrons that use it for their own custom maps.
Yep.
But most of them are creators indeed.
Okay. So that's great. So we're going to go on to our lesson from here. But if anybody has any questions for Nick before he has to go, please step up and say something, or PM him later. You can always message him. He's going to go to bed soon, I imagine, but he's over in the Central Europe.
It's getting a bit late here. But
yep.
Indeed, I'm always on the Discord as well for Fantasy Grounds Academy. So if you need me, I'm always there. Just PM me or tag me. Any questions you have, any comments you have, I'd love to hear them.
All right, great. Okay, let's get on with the lesson. Thanks, Nick. If you want to stick around, you're welcome to.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And going to have you guys go ahead and join mine once I get it going here. So I will go to Fantasy Grounds and do a screen share. Now, if you guys want to join the Fantasy Grounds, can you guys see it?
Yep. I can.
Okay. And let me check and change the stream here to the correct window. All right, so we are back, folks, for the lesson part of this. Thanks again, Nick, for that. It was great. Okay, so that lesson or that part of the show was mainly to show you that you can use third-party applications if you have to create content in Fantasy Grounds. Mainly, you will use the tools that are baked into Fantasy Grounds Unity, but I'm pretty sure there's quite a bit of the community still using third-party maps and such. So I'd like you to join us for the rest of the lesson, and we're going to kind of start from scratch. But I'm going to use one of Nick's maps, so that is something that I definitely want to check out and incorporate it into the lesson. I think it will help speed things up too. So the main thing about the maps in Fantasy Grounds is basically understanding the directories and how that works. So you have an assets folder. So the assets folder, it features a few different groups. You have tokens, you have portraits, and you have images. So let's click on images, and that is where you're going to either place or access your content. Now, when you first start off with Fantasy Grounds and you don't have anything yet, you're going to have a data folder. The data folder is actually the higher level, or the top level of where the files are stored within the back end of Fantasy Grounds. However, if in this particular campaign, I don't have a campaign folder yet because I haven't added any content yet. So Nick, if you have those files handy, I'd like to, if you're still here, I'd like to have you send me those, and I'll put them into the lesson.
Okay. Let me send them over.
Yep. So Nick is taking the files that he generated during the demonstration, and he's going to send those to me through Discord, and then I'm going to add them in as assets to my campaign. Now, I'm not putting it on the data level because I only want it for this campaign. If you wanted a map that's permanently to be used throughout several campaigns, you would store that in the data folder. But in this case, once I put the files in the backend, so if I click on the folder button, it's going to pop up the actual backend. So it's in Fantasy Grounds Campaigns DunGen, which is the name of this campaign, and then images. So it's in a subdirectory of the main master. So it's in the campaign directory. So Nick has sent me the files. I'm going to download them, and I'm going to put these in to Fantasy Grounds. And I'm just going to do the, let's see, the ones that you gave me. And so let me save that. So all I'm doing right now is just saving the files. And this is a JPEG, by the way. So JPEGs are a lot easier on Fantasy Grounds. So if you use PNG files, that's fine. But just remember the file size is much greater. So what I'm doing now is just taking the XML file and the actual dungeons that he generated. Okay, that's that. So this also shows that you could share these assets amongst your table, and you'll be able to come up with maybe a player map, and then you can take the other one and create a DM map. So it can be a lot of fun. Might be a little extra work doing all that, but it's definitely not as time consuming once you get it into Fantasy Grounds. It makes it so much easier. So I'm copying the data from my downloads folder into the backend or the directory that's called out or defined in Fantasy Grounds. So when I click on the folder button in the assets, it brings up the images folder for this campaign. So I'm going to refresh this once I get the files in. Okay, so I have the folder filled in the back end, kind of like what Nick had showed earlier, and I'm going to hit the refresh. So whenever you make changes in Fantasy Grounds, you need to hit the refresh folder, and that will bring up all the recent changes of files that you add or take away. So I'm going to hit refresh, and it should create another subfolder called campaign, which it has. So now you have a campaign folder that's unique to this particular campaign setting. Now, when I double click on here are the two maps that Nick showed us earlier. So I'm going to start with the dungeon map here. And this is your preview that shows you basically what the image is. You can stretch this out so you can see it a little closer. And this is basically the map that was generated with the tool. So what I'm going to do now is go to images, which is on the far right side. And I'm going to make a group. And the reason I'm doing this is to organize my maps that I'm creating. So I'm going to click on the edit button here, and that will allow me to rename. So I'm calling this dungeon map so I remember what was going on. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the edit button. And now I have a group formed here. So if you're organized enough, you can actually import all of these images at once. So if you make a whole bunch of maps and then you want to import them in one shot, you can do that. Or you can do it individually, or you can just drag the image, make a new image in the images section. But I want to show you how utility this can be. So right now I have these two maps. If I click on Create from Campaign Assets, it gives me a dialog that says, are you sure you want to import all campaign images? You would say yes. This would be something you want to do at the end. So you want to organize the files into folders. you want to make sure that the XML files are in the same folder as the images, and do not rename them. You can always rename them in Fantasy Grounds, but do not rename them in the backend, because then they won't match up. So I'm going to hit yes. And once I do that, now I have the 2 images that were in the assets folder. And these are the file names here. So here's the dungeon map. And then this is the actual dungeon. So the other one was a cavern, and this one's a dungeon. So if you go to the line of sight button here in the menu, there is the line of sight. It's already generated for you. Now, it's not perfect. You're going to have some things you're going to have to move around and such, but it cuts down. Like this here for the cavern would probably take me anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how many data points. This does have a few extra data points, as Nick had mentioned. So technically, you could go in here and reduce a few of them if that becomes an issue. But the size of this map and the the dimensions isn't too bad. But if you have a huge map that you generate and you do something like this, you will take a slight performance hit on Fantasy Grounds. So just let you know that. So the less of these data points you have, the better. So regardless if you're putting them in yourself or you're generating it like this, you want to think smaller. You do not want a huge Hurricane dungeon. And the reason for that is I'm going to show you. So this is about the maximum size that I would use for Fantasy Grounds. So it's a little bit big, but it's still really workable. And right now what I'm doing is kind of centering it. So you have a tool that you can use, this toggle toolbar in the top right corner. And what that'll do is it'll allow you to bring in, any assets that you're going to put in. You can edit the file. And in this case, I'm going to hit zoom to fit, which is up here and just arrows. And that recenters the map. So if you're like way off somewhere else, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Oops, I didn't want to do that. How did I end up drawing that? I wasn't even in drawing mode. I think I moved the file. Yeah, what a mess I've made already. Look at that. Okay, so to get out of this.
Didn't they add a Control-Z to the maps?
Yeah, they put it back. They did. Unfortunately, I didn't generate these lines. So I moved existing lines. So there's no Control-Z for me here. Anyways, I can fix this. Not a big deal. Anyhow, so you have the line of sight already generated. So that takes off a lot of the work. And see this area here, you can turn this into a secret door if you wanted to. You could do all kinds of really cool things once you have the line of sight established. So this is just a quicker way to get to what you want or get closer to building your map. Yeah, I'm hitting Control-Z. It's not. I'm hitting Control-Z. It's not doing it. So maybe it's Alt-Z. I don't know. Nope. So I don't know if they added that back or not. But anyway, so you get the idea that the maps can be added quicker. So the other thing is that you can actually connect these two maps if you wanted to, but you'd have to make tiles out of these. So that might be a little bit different process, but you can actually import these tiles and arrange them. And if you have a point of egress, you can connect them together in the map tool. So if you, for instance, if you took one of the things that you'll want to do before you even do any of that is, of course, we're going to have the line of sight on here, but you want to put a grid. And I'm pretty sure that Nick rendered these at 50 instead of 70, because I normally go with, Okay.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do is go to the grid section here. And this is the first thing you want to do when you get a map. Actually, you want to lock it, the layer, so it doesn't move on you. And then you're going to take and turn on the visibility of the grid. It's already set to 50 by 50. And that's what the information that you need to know. So now when you come in here, you notice these lines are a little bit obnoxious. They're kind of a little too dark or a little bit too crazy. So what you can do is go to the tint, which is in the color picker, and you can pick any color you want. So I'm going to go with this so it stands out a little bit more. And you can turn down the alpha channel so it's not so obnoxious. And that makes it more digestible when you're playing. So that's one of the things that you want to do in the beginning when you are creating maps, is to put on the grid first. And that helps you line things up. It gives the line of sight, the actual distance, and all that stuff. So the grid is an important aspect of creating maps. Or if you do your own, or if you import them, you got to have a grid on it. Even if there's a grid painted on it, you still have to overlay a grid. I recommend getting maps that do not already have the grid on them, so you're not fighting with trying to line them up. Because a lot of the maps that you find online are distorted, or they're not rendered to work with VTT. So like a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons maps were made for PDFs and books. They were not necessarily designed for virtual tabletop. So there's a lot of work that goes into editing those files to make them compatible with virtual tabletop. In this case, with the tool with Nix, it just doesn't render anything other than the actual pixels, and you can set that in the tool. So my favorite is like 75 or 70 by 70. That gives you good quality, but it's not too big. So I think for Unity, in most cases, you can get by with 60 to 100 pixels, but if you go beyond that, that's overkill. So between 50 and 100 pixels is good for any map. For Fantasy Grounds, also depends on your video card and such, but I think that 50 is a safe number. I think 75 is kind of a medium, kind of a compromise, or 70, and then 140 would probably be your max for Fantasy Grounds Unity, and it's actually overkill. But if you play online with like other VTTs, 140 is also a standard. So just kind of giving you a heads up. So that's the most important part, actually, this first step. You get the map in here, you put your grid on it, you lock the layer, and that is basically what you want to do in the beginning. So that is just one piece of the lesson that you need to learn, is the size of the map, the scope of it, putting the grid on it, and locking the layer. And the reason we're locking it, because once you have the grid on, you don't want to accidentally move this layer. So that's why it's locked. If for some reason you have to adjust it, you can, but it just starts to become cumbersome. So just a little shout out there, heads up. So is there any questions initially for this first piece? Because that's the most important part of it, is to get the grid on there, get it lined up, and make it digestible so that you can use it in your games. Nope, no comments or questions on that. Well, like I said, you can change the color. So if you don't like that bright yellow, you can go with blue. So if I wanted to do like a light blue, I can do that. If it's a little bit too faded for you, you can bring up the alpha channel a little bit. That way it actually shows for you. So that's something that would help you decide. You can theme it, like maybe you turn the stuff light brown or something. I don't know. As long as it works for you. Okay, so the next thing you want to do now is probably take a look at the line of sight. So I picked the easier of the rooms since I screwed up the other map. And I don't want to spend a lot of time fixing it. But I'm going to illustrate some key concepts here. So we're going to unlock the map again. And you have an array of tools on the top. You have play mode, which is the mode that you want to be in when you're actually playing or trying to move tokens. And I mean like NPCs and characters. I'm not talking about assets. I'm talking about the actual tokens. It will not allow you to select the layer that they're on if you are not in play mode. The other thing about play mode is toggling on the player vision and turning on and off line of sight enabling lighting or turning it on or off. These are things that you need to learn how to use when you're running a game, because those are your main tools for, after your map is done. So the next step is the layers tool. And this is where you can go into your assets, grab a chair, or maybe it's a mound or some skulls or whatever. You put them in the tile area, and then you would stamp it on where you want it. The next thing is to have a brush application where you can select either this, a brush line, or you can pick an asset to paint with. So you don't have to have a paintbrush necessarily. It can be a shape. It can be some of the tiles that come with, or the brushes that come with the assets for the map packs. So you can learn how to paint with it. It takes a little practice. I have to admit I'm not that great at it, but you can achieve some pretty cool effects and things once you learn how to use the paintbrush. You have the effects tool, which will allow you to add the overlay effects such as clouds and such. And this is the line of sight tool. This is what we're gonna get into shortly here. The next thing is lighting. We'll get into that towards the end of the lesson. That is something that most people get a little confused about. And then there's still the old global mask where you can set a whole mask over this and reveal as you go. So you can use it traditionally as if you were using Fantasy Grounds Classic. So there are some features in here that you'll have to get familiar with and put a little time in, because a lot of people want that easy button. Well, it's not as easy as it looks. You have to actually put in a little bit of time to start understanding how the layers and the tools work. If you already work with Photoshop and those type of programs, this will be second nature to you. Once you get familiar with the shortcuts and such, it will be fairly simple for you. It might be a little frustrating because the tools are different. You might be used to using certain control commands and such, but once you understand the tools and what it offers, it'll get easier for you. So let's go back to the line of sight. I'm going to expand the map a little bit so it's a little bit more visible. And you do that by dragging the bottom right corner. So you can size this any way you want, but you want to get it to a size where it's not covering everything, but it's located in a position to where you still have access to some of your other things, such as character sheets. So if you're going to have characters on here, you want to have a space for that and for your text and such. And then the other thing is, using this little toolbar drop down, you can use the arrows to rezoom or recenter. So if you're like this and you're looking at it close up and you want to go back out, you click the zoom to fit and it'll put the map, it'll recenter it. Conversely, or similarly, you can right click on the map, you can click on layers or view, excuse me, and you can go zoom to fit or zoom to fill. There's a couple of different options there. So that is something you need to learn how to do. And then also, when you click on a map or an image, you can zoom in and out like I'm doing now. Now, one of the things I'd mentioned is the map size itself. If it's too big, what you're going to end up doing the whole game is you're going to be zooming in and out like I'm doing now. And that's because this image is really big. You don't want that if you can help it. You don't have a choice in some of the maps that are already provided to you in official content. However, if you're going to make your own maps, make it easier on yourself. I wouldn't make caverns or dungeons much bigger than this. You can always connect them. So this point where the map is leaving the actual area, I could pull in the other asset and use that, but then I'd have to also add the line of sight to it. But nonetheless, it'll allow you to connect these together if you wanted to. Or you can link them with the top left corner. You can link one map to another at the point of egress or where you exit or enter. So it's up to you how you want to handle it. So now I'm going to go and go back to the map tools. So I'm going to unlock the image and go to the line of sight layer. So this layer has been created by the application, or you can go in yourself and go to the edit mode, which is like line mode, and you can connect all these little data points yourself manually. So what this application did is it helped make the lines for us, and thus saving you at least 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how big your map is. So it just depends on how efficient you are with the tool. So now that that's in place, what that'll do is it'll occlude players and light from moving through these sections in the map itself. And down here is the point of egress, so we're going to actually put a door there. And that is something that most people struggle with or they don't understand initially. So we have line of sight already made. And if you want to go back and adjust line of sight, you can, but you need to make sure that you are in the selection mode. So we're in the select mode. We are in the line of sight wall tool. Okay. And then once you are here, you can click on a point and you can drag it. So if you want to move this, you can. So that allows you to adjust where you don't like maybe you didn't like where this was. So you'd move that and you can reconnect it. Now the way this works, this map tool, is each one of these segments is separate in this case. But when you draw a line of sight for yourself, it'll be one continuous line unless you stop. So it depends on how you generate your maps, but the tool creates this as separate segments, so it's actually a little easier to edit. When you do it in Fantasy Grounds, it's going to be one long continuous line. So it'll be harder for you to select all the points. So if you need to do that, you just go into selection mode and you just highlight, or in this case, select the points that you want to work with. So that's how you select points. One of the things that most people have trouble with in this mode is they forget that they are in line tool. And if they want to move something, they'll still be in the line tool and they'll try to move it and they'll draw a line. So make sure that you're in the selection tool and not the line tool when you're moving stuff. Or if you want to delete something, you double click on it, you hit the delete key, and it will remove whatever sections are connected to this, to the vertice of this line. So it's going to delete this and this because it's connected to this center line. So that's basically where a lot of the problems are, is that people forget that they're in a drawing mode or they're in selection mode. That is very important for the map tool. And that's where most people go wrong, is they don't have the perception of knowing that they're in the wrong tool. I still do it, even though I know better. I might be in here working with it and I forget to switch over and then I screw up my map. So get used to switching back and forth between the different types of editing here, which is a line, you have a rectangle, and you have an ellipse. And then the selection tool gets you out of the edit mode and gets you into a select mode. So that's very important to remember that piece of this, because that's generally where the frustration is. At least for me it is. I don't know why, but I always forget to switch back and forth. And I've tried to teach that, and I can't even follow my own teachings because I'm such a bad habit of moving, just trying to do things in a hurry and not moving back and forth between the various tools. And that also applies to the terrain type. So if you're in wall mode and you're drawing walls, that's great. But if you want to draw a wall and you're in the terrain mode, that's not going to work. So make sure you're in the correct data type before you draw or even add on to it. So generally what you want to do is draw all your lines first or all your doorways first, and then do all of your terrain, and then do all of your secret doors. You do it in steps, so you're not switching, or do it in groups, so you're not switching back and forth between the tool as you go. That's what takes a lot of time. So you want to try to draw the data points in first, and then go in and draw in all of your assets like your doors and windows. Do those all in groups. That way you're not going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's generally another time suck, is that you end up spending more time fiddling around with the tool than actually working. So try to get used to selecting things and being in different drawing modes and being in the different types of drawing. So right now I'm in terrain. I don't want terrain. I want to go to a door mode. So I'm going to put one door in here in the beginning where you enter. So the door is basically going to want you to make a square or a rectangle in most cases. So I'm going to draw that in here, and then I'm going to edit it. So first things first is I can go to line mode, but I'm going to go to rectangle mode. It's a lot quicker. And I'm just going to draw a door through here. It's not going to be perfect, and I can make the adjustments as I need. So there's our door. So right now, the reason I made it thick and not thin is because when you're zoomed way out like this and you're in play mode, it's hard to select the door. You can't select it easily without zooming way in, because there's a toggle where you can lock the door, you can have it open or closed. If you have it too thin, like a thin little bar, it's going to be very hard to access it without zooming all the way into the map. So don't make your doors and windows so narrow if you can help it. That is a big problem in running a game when you got doors. So that's a tip, basically. So you see how you got this kind of like this mess here? What you can do is go to select mode, and I'm going to clean this up a little. So you don't have a very good connection here between the door and the walls. So I'm going to clean this up. First thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I have data points for the wall itself that's going to cross through the door, and then I'll clean it up later. So I'm going to go to the line tool, and I'm going to go to the wall tool, and I'm just going to draw a line across and intersect through the walls and the door. So this will help me establish the points between the doorway and the wall. That way we don't get any light leaking out of here, and it comes together a lot cleaner. So I just added a line just for the sake of showing you how to edit this. So now you have these two lines, and you want to get rid of those by selecting the data points. It's harder to do when you don't have the points to select. So I'm going to actually go back to the line tool, and I'm in the wall tool, and I'm just going to draw a line that intersects these two middle lines. You might have a single line, or you might have two. So you can see right there, I've drawn this in, and it's got these little tails on there. It's okay because I'm going to go back to selection mode, and I'm going to highlight all these points, and then hit the delete key. And what that does is it removes the excess lines out of here. And I got to work on this corner here because it's kind of a mess too. So basically, this little tail, I can delete that. So the little tails that are created, you can go back and delete those. You don't have to keep those. And I'm going to drag actually this line over so that it meets up with the wall of the doorway. And if you're having trouble with the snap to grid, turn that off when you're working with this kind of thing. That way you can manually move it without it constantly trying to grab or link onto something. And what you'll find is you'll start getting really messy when you start playing with these points. So you want to get rid of excess lines. So I'm going to go back to the drawing tool. And here's this where I can delete it now. And when I say this, I mean this cross point. So I'm going to take and go to the selection tool and highlight all these points and hit delete. And that gets rid of the excess points that you don't need anymore. And then for this, I need to go back to selection mode. And you could do all kinds of things to manipulate these lines. So some of these you may not need. See, I just double clicked on that and selected everything, and that got rid of all the points. So there's different things you can do to help, like macroize or make it a macro. Macroize, is that a word? And then you go back to the magnetic snap, because what you'll notice is that you may not actually be connected when you zoom way in. So you got to be careful with that. That's why you would intersect lines and then delete the tails. So this is a tail. So that got rid of all the extra points. So I'm showing you this mess because this is basically what you're going to be facing when you first start. You're going to have this problem until you get used to the tool. So all I'm doing right now is moving the points. Sometimes you have to turn off the magnetic snap. And that will help you when it comes to this kind of thing. This can get really frustrating. So when you learn how to use the tool, you won't be fighting it as much. It's one of those things where you have to learn to put in your time, and it will get easier for you. So right now, this is not a good leave because I don't have any of the wall data that's required. So if I toggle this back to play mode and come back to this area for the doors, it's not right. It's not even added correctly. So these are the types of things that you got to watch out for when you're using the map tool. So you can see this became a big freaking mess because I just kind of went in there and just haphazardly did it. So I got to learn how to use the tool better, and that's why we're doing these classes and lessons, because these are the types of things that you're going to be fighting. So to make a doorway properly, it's harder to do in a cavern because you have all these different data points all over the place. So you could essentially take the line tool and redo the doorway if you want. So that way you can just delete all this crap and not have to fight it. So the thing that I'm going to do is go to the door, and instead of doing a rectangle, I'm just going to connect right in here, and I have this snap off. I'm going to turn it back on. And I'm just going to make 4 points. So that way you have the doorway, and then you have this line here, which is basically this is your point of entry. And I'm going to go back to the highlight tool and get rid of that mess. And now all I have to do is connect this here with the wall tool. And that's closer to what you want right there. And then I'll just take this data point in the select mode. And move it. And then for this line here, I'll leave it. But out here, in these data points, I'm just going to move them in. So there's your door. And it wasn't that big of a deal. We just had to go and fix a few lines. So you can get in a kind of a bind when you're starting to edit. You just have to make sure you have the right points selected and that you have an idea of how you want to attack it. Because I just kind of went in there haphazardly and threw it in there. I didn't think it through, but if I would have known better, I would have just taken and done this line in the beginning. So that would have been a lot less work. But nonetheless, usually doors are not that complicated. It's just when you get into these caverns, when you have all these weird oblong walls, that can be a difficult task sometimes. So if I go back to images, and if I go to this tool or go to this map and go to line of sight, maybe I want to put a door in here. So that is a lot simpler because you don't have all these different data points. So I can technically take this and create a doorway through here. So if I go to the door tool, and I'm just going to draw it in here and make it, make it a little bit easier. And I'm in the rectangle tool. So that's not so bad because you just draw that in and then you get rid of the extra data points so that this actually becomes a doorway. So if I go to line of sight, play mode, I got to have a character. So when you go in here, you can see that you'll have the door. Let me get this character going. You want to put your characters on the combat tracker, and then you will put them on a map. Oops, I need a token. So that's another thing is there's some little quirks with Fantasy Grounds. When you're testing your content, you need to have NPCs and characters. So that helps you vision how it's going to be presented and how it's going to look once you use the map tools. So is there any questions so far? I'm just kind of dallying around here, playing with the tools and showing you some of the things that you can run into when you're playing with the map tools. And I'm sure you've all done this. This is something that is very common when you first start, is you'll have a lot of issues like this. And try to get it to where you can work through those and kind of learn what not to do. And that's where you have to take time to play with the tool in order to get good with it. So I'm going to go ahead and move this dwarf. He doesn't have a vision yet, but if he was a dwarf, you could put the vision here. I'm just going to use one of the effects. So if I go up here on the top right, under the effects tool, there are some preset lights. So I'm going to give him a candle, and that puts that effect on him. And then once I put him on the map, it shows. What? Yeah. I'll go get. I'm streaming. So here's the doorway now. So when we open it, the light will come through, or here's the doorway. And when we open this, it allows the token to go through if it's open. So the light will spill through as well. Now, if you lock it, the token cannot be moved through there. And as the game master, you have to hold shift. So if you want your characters to go through walls for some reason, or to make it convenient for you, when you move the token across the map, hold down shift. That will take you through the walls. If not, you'll get stuck. And then for the game masters, if you don't want the players to be in here right away, or the door is locked, you click and hit shift. And that puts a lock on it, so they can't open it unless you open it for them. So this is your kind of your doorway, and the light will not go through that door if it's closed. So these are some of the disconnects that a lot of people get when they're first starting to use it. So characters go on the combat tracker. From the combat tracker, they go on the map. and then you have to be in play mode. And in play mode, you can toggle what the players see versus what you see. So right now, I'm kind of like in a game master mode. If you switch this over to player mode, this is what they see. And if you don't want that on permanently, you can hold Control P to toggle. So you can toggle between player view and DM view. So this would be, if I was running this campaign or this game, this would be the mode I would be in right now, is just this overview. And I can see their lighting a little bit, but if I really want to zoom in and see what it looks like for them, I just hit Control P. And that's not a permanent toggle, that's like a preview. If I want it on permanently, I need to change that in the play mode. Now, if you're working on maps and you don't want all the line of sight stuff, you can turn that off. You can turn off the line of sight, and you can turn off the line of sight. You turn off the lighting mode. So this is the basic mode that you'd be in. So this you'd want to work with when you're placing assets and just kind of working on the map. But once you're done, you turn back on the lighting. You turn back on your line of sight if you have it. And then if you want to see what the players see, you change or enable the player vision or view. And you can toggle it. So maybe you leave it like this the whole time you play, but then you want to hit Control P just to see what the rest of the map looks like as the game master. Players can't do that, but game master can. So you can switch this and toggle it however you want to use this. And I think this is one of the things that people get confused on. So you have a player vision, you have enabling or disabling line of sight, and then you also have enabling and disabling like lights that you put on the map or on tokens and such. So those are the three modes that you'll be playing around with as a game master. And when you're developing a map or working on it, you probably want to turn off most of that until you get everything placed, and then turn it back on. And then you can toggle it on and off when you need to preview it. So you might want to leave the line of sight on just so you know where things are at, or maybe you turn it all the way off so that you're not affected by the shading and shadowing and such. So that's probably for running a game. I think that's important things, is to understand what these modes can do, and then also to understand that you turn them on and off as needed. And then even when you're inside of the map tool itself, like this layer, it should be locked. You don't want that live and open, because you can accidentally move it, and then all your grid will be off. And then when you're actually in the line of sight mode, you're going to be taking a look at what the lines are doing and how they're set up and laid out. So that's basically usage of how you would use that, provided that you have your line of sight set up. So is there any questions on that? Okay. So let's go back. So let's say that you want to add a torch or something like that. So in this map here, I'm going to pretend that this is the entrance here. So I'll go ahead and put a doorway in there. I'm already in the door tool, and I go to the rectangle tool. So I'm just going to use that for the door. I'm going to take out the extra points, or I'll move them just by shifting it down. It's pretty easy. And then I might want to put some torches here to illuminate this entryway. So what I need to keep in mind is that Fantasy Grounds has some lighting presets. So in here, I can place assets that would represent a torch, or I can just put the light on. So what I'm going to do is actually add some sort of little asset token. First, I want to center this a little bit again. Then I'll move this over. And I'm going to go to Assets. And if you have your own assets or you subscribe to the art packs that Fantasy Grounds offers, you will have some tools and assets. So I'm going to go ahead and do a search for torch. And mind you, it takes a couple minutes for it to search sometimes because of the amount of content that you have available to you, depending on how much your library, how big it is. So when you do your search, be careful with what you search for. If you search for goblin, you're going to probably be waiting a couple minutes for that to come up. So I have some various assets here that I can place on the map. So there's some torches here. There are different styles and varieties. I'm going to go with this little torch down here that is, it looks like it's got a little halo, and it looks like it's a top-down view. And there's some lantern wall torch looking things that you can put there. So I can technically use those too, but I'm going to use the one that already has kind of like the color put into it. And I'm going to switch up here in the map mode. So this is important. So instead of dragging it straight from the assets to the map, I'm going to go to the layers tool. And in layers, I'm going to select whatever tile or image. So in this case, it's going to be the torch. So I'm going to drag and drop it into the tile area. So a lot of people, when they first start, they'll drag it straight from the assets to the map. That's not a problem. It just makes it harder for you to manipulate. So it's easier to put it in the tile area initially, and then you can manipulate it. So at this point, I haven't stamped anything on here yet, so you can rotate. So you can rotate the direction, and you can also change the size. So right now it says 2 by 2. So that means the torch is going to take up a 2 by 2 tile area. I don't want that. It's a little big. So I'm going to put it at 0.5. And that's like half a square. So that's this is where you manipulate the size of the item before you stamp it, instead of trying to stamp it and then resizing it. This way it's more uniform, so you can just click wherever you want these torches all at once. If you back out of it and try to go back in, then you're going to have to reset all that. So it's good to know where you want the torches at. So I'll go ahead and set that up now. So I have it set for this tile. I've already rotated it. I've set the different sizes here. So I want half by half, which is half square. And then I'm going to change the tint a little bit. So in the color picker, you can change the color of the torch itself, and you can also change the color of the light. So I'm not going to do too much to this other than the opacity. So I'm going to change the opacity just a little bit. So when I place this on the map, it's not so much contrast. I really want this to blend in more with the background. So I'm going to put a little opacity in here, which is, make it a little bit more sheer. And that way, when I place the asset on here, it doesn't have this contrast. And that's particularly helpful if you have a map that's made by a different artist, and then you're using different assets from another artist. They tend to clash because of the style. So if you want to help alleviate that, so it looks a little cleaner or a little bit more, meshed in together, you turn down the asset, the alpha channel, which is your transparency, and that will allow it to kind of blend in more with the background. You don't want to do it too much because then the wall bleeds through. You just a little bit, and that really helps a lot with blending the image in. So all I'm doing right now is placing the actual asset. I'm not doing anything with light just yet. So there are a few places where I want the torch. So I'm going to have a couple in the entryway and then a couple throughout the dungeon. So I'm going to place all those now so I'm not going back and forth because I already have the tool set up where I want it. So I don't want to have to come back and do this over and over and over. So I'm going to do it all at once. So I'm going to place one here on the map. And then I'm going to place another one. And if you don't want to do what I'm doing, like scrolling in and out like that, just use the recenter tool, and that will help. I'm going to put one over here and maybe up here. So those are the only areas that are going to have torches. And as you can see, I have all these different instances of that torch. So to make this more organized, I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this torches. Now I'm going to drag all the torches into that folder. And as you touch these or select them, it selects the different torches. So if you want to come back later and manipulate that, you want to go into selection mode. Right now I'm in stamp mode. You don't want to be in stamp mode because if I click on the map, it's going to make another torch. And this is where people have problems. So click on the selection mode and then click on the actual object that you want to manipulate. In this case, it's this torch here. So if you want more free-floating freedom, so you're not quite as snap to grid, you can turn that off and you'll have a little bit more freedom of movement. And you want to make sure that the torch isn't going to be on the other side of your line of sight. So if I turn on line of sight, I don't want the torch to be on the opposite side of the wall. So you got to turn that on and off just so you can see what you're doing. For instance, this asset here, I don't want that right there. I want it inside more. So I'm going to go make sure that I'm selecting the right tool for the right process. So I'll go back to layers, and now that I have this correct layer selected, I'm going to move it. Let's see. So I have it selected. The snap to grid's off. I'm in the selection tool. And by holding Control down, I can manipulate exactly where I want this, so it doesn't snap to grid. So the Control tool, holding that down while you're moving your asset, will make it more free floating. If you have snap to grid on and you just try it that way, it's going to try to place it within a grid space. So this is a better way to do it. So when you're placing your asset, you can be a lot more accurate. So I'm going to zoom back out and go ahead and edit the other ones. So the reason I zoomed out is so I can see where they're at. I know there's one here, but what layer is that? So just highlight when you're in the tile mode and you're looking for your layers, there's that one. I've already adjusted that one. There's this one up here, so I want to go ahead and adjust that if I need to. So again, I'm in selection mode and I have that tile selected. Now I'm going to hold down the Control key and move the asset where I want it. So I'm just going to move it down a little bit so it's not on the other side of the line of sight wall barrier. And again, I'll zoom out. And I have this last one that I placed selected. And I'm in the selection tool and in the layer that I am working with, which is this light layer. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Control key and move the asset over. And that's all you have to do to help manipulate the pieces that you want to put in place. If you don't hold down Shift, it's going to be annoying. It's going to go where it wants to go. So use the Shift or the Control key, excuse me, to actually move the asset once you have it selected. So that's where a lot of people get confused, is they don't know what layer they're on, and it can get very confusing. So you have to make sure you're on the correct asset layer. So each torch is a separate layer, and including the dungeon map. And then the dungeon map has the walls on top of it. So it kind of has its separate layer, but because you can toggle that on or off, you can turn the walls off or on if you have it placed within that It's actually placed on this big map, the line of sight. So now that I have all those torches in there, now what I want to do is assign light to it. So now let's just assume that you've done all of your placement. Okay, that's the first step. Now you want to go to the light tool, and you're going to assign the type of lighting that you want for your torches. So in this case, Fantasy Grounds has some sub-tools here. You have the selection tool, you have the light tool, which is add light, you have a token tool, you have a token vision, and you have your ambient light. So you have all these different tools up here for placing different types of light. So in this case, I'm going to say add light. And if you have the torches selected, the light layer will apply to this folder or to these assets. Or you can put the light layer on a whole separate layer. So I might do that just so I have some, so they're all connected to one source, so I can turn them on and off as a group instead of individually. So to unselect or to deselect a thing that you don't, if like, let's say you don't want torches and you come down to this, you're like, well, I don't want that either. I don't want anything. So you click anywhere away from these layers. So I just clicked inside this blank spot. Now there are no layers selected at all. And I'm going to make a new layer by picking a preset. So I'm in the light mode for add light. I'm going to click down here for a torch. Okay, that's kind of a preset. Now I may not like the color, or I may change the distances and the ranges. You have that option. I'm just going to switch the color up a little bit. So I'm going to make the color kind of match the torches. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the color tool, which I'm in the light tool right now. All I'm doing is taking a preset and modifying the color of the light. So here's the color picker. You can either do it manually, you can type in an RGB value, or you can use the eyedropper. So the eyedropper, when you click on this, if you hover over any sort of light source on your map, and in this case, this is a kind of a thing that I want to select for. So that looks a little too dark for it to be a light. So that didn't work out too well because these are really small, these assets. And then I think I'm also selecting a different layer. So when you do want to select something, make sure it's big enough so you have enough space. And so, but you can technically take the eyedropper and put it on top of something that you want to take the color from. So if you wanted to emulate the wall color, you could select different parts of the wall. But I think for the sake of light, I'm going to go ahead and select a yellowish, kind of a brighter light. Before it was a lot lighter. And then I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit so it's a little bit more translucent. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now I'm going to start placing these on top of where the torches are. So I'm in the add light. I have my preset. I don't have a layer selected, but it will create one as soon as I click. There's the layer right there. Now, I'm not sure what happened there, but I have the lights on here. And what I'm going to do is, it's probably because of I have this selected. So I'm going to turn off this. You can turn off the lights temporarily, or you can turn it back on to see how it affects the game map. And then you have this too, so you can preview. All right, so what I'm going to do is go check out these other two that I placed. I must have done something different. So I want to go to selection mode, and I want to be in the lighting mode. And what I'm going to do is select. So this is selected, and it's moved around. And it's almost like it doesn't have a preset on there, whereas these other ones do. These are actually on.
You have your token selected. If you unselect the token, you should be able to see them.
Oh, okay, got it. There we go. You have to be in play mode too. There we go. All right, so he's right. So I just accidentally had this selected, and that limits your view because you're looking through the eyes of the player and not the overview. So there's your torchlight. And what's handy about this is if you do decide to put them on one layer, you have the ability to turn it off. So if they came into the dungeon and then all of a sudden some magical light came on, you can toggle that and it'll come on. And you don't have to individually turn them on or off. So there's different ways to handle this. Or if you wanted to toggle them one at a time, you can assign the light for each one of these torches and even give them different colors or whatever. So it's up to you how you want to handle it. But I kind of like the uniformity, at least for different types of light. So let's say I had a magical light in the center of this room. I would probably put that on a different layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to put, let's grab an asset first. So what do you guys think, a dais or some kind of magical object that I'm going to stick in the middle of the room? I don't know. What do you guys want? I might have it. We're going to place a magic light on top of it. So what, like an altar or some kind of raised platform? I don't know.
A fountain.
Fountain.
Yeah, fountain's good.
Well, what if I don't have one?
I was promised differently.
Basin. No. Okay. Let's try pool.
You did have a fountain. It was a red one over there, but.
Oh, okay. Hold on a sec. This is a map overlay, so it may not look right. Let me just try a basin or like let's do a big bowl or something like that.
That's good. Otherwise, a glowing sword always works.
Jeez. I really got what I asked for. Okay, so there's a thing called assorted herbs. Not really my choice in, what it says, but I'm going to use that as our fountain basin. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the layers tool. And then to the assets. I'm going to kind of fix this. There we go. It's our workspace is a little bit better. So I'm going to take this bowl and put it up here in the tile. And it's 3 by 3. That's a pretty good sized bowl there. So maybe I'll put it in this little area here, the fountain. So that's going to be a 3 by 3 area. So if I want to fix that, maybe I want it 2.5 or whatever. I'll just do 3 by 3. So I just slightly edited it because it said 3 by 1 or 3.1. So let's see, if I stick that here, it should fill up this quite a bit of area here. Yeah, so that's going to be our fountain, even though it's a bowl. So as you can see now that it's been painted. Now, if I click again, it's going to draw another bowl. I don't want that. So I want to go to selection mode. And then I can manipulate it by selecting the layer, which is here. And if I want to move it, I can do so. And now I'm holding control, so I can move it wherever I want without it snapping the grid. So maybe I want it up here. And it's not perfectly on a grid necessarily. You can, but you don't have to. That's pretty good. Now, I think if a dwarf built this, it would be perfect. But this is a human settlement, so there's no dwarves in here. Okay, so there's this basin. So that is something that we're going to add. We'll add an effect to it. So I'm going to add some water, actually, to this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the effects area, and I'm actually going to create an effects layer. So this fountain, I might make a folder for it. So I'm going to call this water fountain. And this will be where this fountain is going to be. So I call this fountain instead of the bowl. So you can rename your layers so it makes more sense to you. And then I want to lock the torch layer. So here is the folder with the torches. So I lock that so I don't accidentally move those later. Now I have the fountain that I want to work on. So I'm going to add an effect. This is going to be just color for right now because I want to have a little bit of color. So you can go adjust colors. And I'm going to make it blue. So what it's going to do is create a mask over the entire map. So if I select that, and I'm going to have it add that to this, it's going to select. So if I go to enable mask, oops, did I place it right? Yeah, so now what I want to do is draw inside of here to give it the illusion that there's blue water in here. And then you can blur it to kind of blend it in so it's not such a contrasted line between the bowl and the edge of the effect. And I'm going to bump up the blue. And that's what it looks like when you don't put a mask on it. It's going to do the whole thing. So we want to put a mask on it. Let me blur it a little too. And that will just that mask will cover that blue tone. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the, let's turn down the red a little bit, turn down the brightness a little bit, turn up the blur. And then when I go in and I'm going to actually click on reveal area. So there's a mask on the entire map, but I'm only going to allow it to peek through this area. And to create an object that's not square, you hold down the Alt key. So you can see now that I've kind of added that layer. So I'm going to go fix it a little bit on the edge here. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is water. There is no drawing tool for this, so this is all freehand. What I'm trying to do is avoid this. I don't want it right on the very edge. So if I wanted to fix that, I can go back to hide area, and I can just hide the area that I don't want to show through. And then if you have to, you can go back and fix this mess that I made. So get used to working with the layers because you can do a lot with it. So there's the kind of the blue water. And like I said, you can turn down the brightness. So, you could kind of decide what you want. Kind of like the darker color, but a little bit more light. So play around with the light. And then you could actually put another layer if you wanted to show depth. So if you wanted to get really fancy, I can put another layer on top of this, change the tone, and give it a little bit more depth. So maybe I would make another ring of blue or another color, make it darker, and then change the various layers. So I'll do that. So I'm going to add another layer, but it's going to be the same thing, except for I'm going to darken it up. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the, would be your add an effects layer. And what I'm going to do is rename this so I don't get confused. Okay, so this is the lighter color water. So I understand what this means. And that's important for you to name these layers because you're going to get confused if you get more complexity. Now I'm going to add another effects layer. It's going to be similar. And then I'm going to select the actual effects type, which in this case is just going to be the color. And then I'm going to adjust it. And you got to remember, I'm on this entire layer, so I need to put the mask on, draw this out with the area. So I'm only going to draw in this lighter part in the center. So I want to make sure I'm on reveal area. I want to make sure I'm on reveal area, and I'm going to adjust these colors down. And then I'll first draw it so I have an idea. So there's the darker part. Now, the nice thing about the tool that they added was this blur. So it takes the hard edges and it blurs it into the next area. And I want to fix this a little bit. So you can see it's blended now. Whereas before, now it's showing the hard line. So you can use this blending tool to give you the desired effect. And now what I'm going to do is make it a little darker. I'm turning the blend way up because it's quite a contrast there. Turn the green up a little or down, depends on what you want to do. So there's, you give it a little bit of depth to the bowl of water instead of just a flat color. And it's very subtle. I mean, it's hardly anything there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add another effect. And this is going to be for the rippling effect for the water. So we're going to go ahead and click on Effects again. This time, in the drop-down menu on Effects, I'm going to pick Water. And as you can see, it applies it to the whole map. You don't want that. So you're going to add a mask, which is Enable Mask. And you're only going to reveal the area that you want to use. So I'm going to go back to holding down the Alt key and then tracing around. And when you do that, you want to be on the inside. If you come all the way up to the edge of the bowl, the illusion or the effect is going to move the edge of this bowl. So I don't want that. I only want the water to move. So I'm going to be on the inside of this blue ring. So I'm in the reveal area now, and it's only going to reveal this area. Then when I'm done, I'll blend it in to see how much contrast there is. And now you can see it's kind of moving around. So that's kind of a little dramatic there. So while I'm still in this layer, I'm going to adjust the edge blur on it so it blends in better. I'm going to turn down the droplet size so it's not so ridiculous, maybe down to 10. Turn the speed down a little bit. And the intensity is what really makes it move fast, so I don't want that. And turn down the horizontal. So it's subtle. Now it kind of looks like a bowl of pudding. So that is how you can, this is how you can blend in with using the blur tool. You don't want to blend it in totally, you have a little contrast, and then you adjust these speeds and intensities to help you make the illusion. So that looks like moving water now. Very subtle. So all that work, and the players may not even notice that. So that's another thing. When you're getting this detailed in your maps, remember that you're probably going to use this once or twice, and you're doing all this frickin' work just for this. So, pick your battles with how much work and detail you want to put into this. Because I know I've done a lot of work and we never even used it. So that's something that happens. So that's basically how we added an asset to this. Now what we can do is let's add a little mist to it. So I can confine the mist to this area, and it just kind of gives it more movement and might even intensify the effect. We'll see. So I'm going to add 2 layers this time, but I'll add one at a time so you're confused. And then this time I'm going to do the mist. Of course, it covers the whole map. We don't want that, so we're going to put on a mask layer. And what I'm going to do is just trace around, and I'm in the reveal area to reveal just the area above the pool here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll trace on the outside this time because it can leave the water a little bit. So I will do tracing more on the edge of this bowl instead of in the water itself. So as you can see, that's pretty dramatic. That doesn't look right. So I'm going to turn the mask up. That helps with the edges. And then the actual speed, turn that way down, and the amount. Now the speed can be in 2 directions. So if I have it on like 55, it turns down the speed on the mist. And then I can turn this up a little so you can actually see the mist. So it's barely there. I mean, it's just kind of floating around in this area. And I'm going to use 2 because right now you can barely see that mist over that water. And it doesn't really look like it's doing much right now. So right now I have it going to the left, I believe. Oh, it's going to the right. Okay. So this is the mist going over this pool of water. Now I'm going to add another mist layer, and I'm going to have it go the other direction, and it will create this illusion that this mist is floating over the top of this. So I'm going to grab another effect, which is the same mist effect, but just another layer. So add the effects layer, add mist again, put the mask on, make sure you're on reveal area, and I'm going to go ahead and draw another layer. And again, I'm going to adjust it. So I'm going to blur it so it blends in with the background a little bit better. I'm going to turn it down just a touch. And the direction, the speed direction, is going to determine, let's see, what did I have it on the other one? Let's see. Okay, that's 47. So I will go with maybe 56 or something like that. And then I will turn it down. And what happens is you get this effect like it's swirling over each other. And then, of course, turn down the amount a little bit. So now what you have is like this, it looks like a tunneling effect, and it's very subtle. It's barely there. So you might have to play with the intensity of these. And then you can switch the order too. So maybe the top layer is going quicker or slower than the bottom layer. So you can change the order of these effects to basically to achieve what you're looking for. So now I'm going to take these effects and I'm going to put them in the water fountain. the folder. And I want to make sure the adjustments, the color adjustments, are on the bottom. If you don't, it's going to look weird. It's not going to display it correctly. And then I'm going to go back on the mist and turn those down a little bit more. It's locked. There we go. So it kind of makes it so that, you know, it's not too bright and you got a little bit of contrast in here. And with those two different directions that the mist is moving, it will create like a swirling effect. And you can see it more when you're using a bigger area. But this will kind of create the illusion that there's some kind of wafting airflow. Now what I'm going to do is apply the light like we were going to begin with. So now that we have the fountain established, now we're going to apply some magical light to it. So we're going to go back to the lighting tool. And this time I'll have the fountain layer selected instead of just its own layer. And then I'm going to change to a different type of lighting. So in this case, I'll use the preset and I'm going to use a pulsing light. So let's see, I'll do spell light, and then I'm going to change it to a pulse. And then color wise, I might use the color picker and kind of get a rough, kind of a lighter variation of this. I can always adjust it too. So that helped me choose a color that's themed for the pool. And I'm going to turn down the transparency a little bit. That'll lighten it up. And then hit OK. And now when you're here, you want to be in the light mode. And there's the pulse behavior. And we'll change the speed as we need to. And I'll go ahead and click. So there is a pulsing kind of light here. And what I'll do is I'll turn off the... So that's what it looks like to the players when they arrive to the pool, provided they don't have a bunch of light. So you have this pulsing effect, and you can change that. So if I go back to the lighting and the select mode, I can click on this light and I can adjust the speed. So if you want it more rapid or slower, I think I like it kind of like that. And then that is basically placing your lights, you know, where you want them. And you can also adjust the range. So maybe you don't want it to flash out so far. You can adjust where the brightness falls off. You can turn this on or off now. So if I go back to, I'm going to put this light inside the fountain since it pertains to that. I'm going to lock this layer and then collapse it. So basically, if I want to do this, I can turn that off or on. So if the players come in, they'll see the pool. And then if they trigger a magical effect or something, or it's a trap or who knows what it is, you can turn that on or off as needed. So that's just a way to use this. And then the fountain should be in that layer. And yes, it's at the bottom. So I'm going to lock all these up and call it good. So is there any questions on that? Is it too much or too little to... Okay. Hey, Matt. Okay, so now what we're going to do is let's take a look at some more assets. So when you're working with a map like this, you don't want this to be in this mode when you're working. So let's turn off the player preview. Let's turn off the line of sight and the lighting. So this would be the mode I'd want to be in when I'm placing objects. It's a lot easier, but if you're doing light, you might have to have in the light, enable line of sight and such. But if it's just an object, like a simple asset or something, you don't really need all that on, and it will help you, see what you're doing basically. Okay, so this lights is separate. Okay, so this should go in there, I believe. Yeah. Okay, wait, do I have 2 in there? There we go. Okay, so this will help clean up the, having 50,000 things in this line here. So you group them together if they're commonly used stuff or anything. Like assets, you could put them all in one bucket if you needed to. So let's go to assets. I don't even know what the theme of this dungeon is, to be honest. What should we look for? I'm going to put it down here in this room. I don't know. How about a mound, or I don't know. What do you guys want to put in there? Let's see. It's hard to say because you don't know what assets I do or don't have, nor do I. So don't feel.
Do a table that's a mimic.
A table that's a mimic. We're going to do that. Unfortunately, you're going to get everything that says table. All right, so here's a table. I'm going to click to the layers tool, which is up here in the menu. I'm going to grab the table and drag and drop it into the tile area. Now, if you look at this, it says 8 by 8. There's no way I'm going to put that big of a table in here. So I'm going to go down to like 2 by 2. And this is why it's valuable to be able to do this here before you place it. And then if you want to change the color of it, you could technically use the eyedropper and kind of use that to theme the color of this. I'm not going to change it, but you could. So now it's 2 by 2. So when I drop this in here, it should center. And it's on the wrong layer, I believe. There we go. So I had the dungeon layer above, so that's why I did that. Okay, so there's that. So you have this, you kind of, see, like I said, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. So what you want to do, if that's the case, is go to the selection tool to manipulate it. Make sure you're on the layer of that asset. So here I clicked the layer, and now I can manipulate it. So I can move it, and then I can also change the opacity. So I'm going to just lightly, kind of just barely kind of nudge that down. So that just immediately, that kind of helps with some of the coloring issues and such. And then I'll take the color dropper and kind of grab some of this things out here, and it kind of helps theme it for the actual map. And then I can turn this down a little bit. There we go. So it's more contrasted this way, but because I used a darker color. So if I wanted to pick something lighter, there we go. There we go. So it kind of helps you theme the object. Now let's get a chair. I want to show you something here. So this is the table. I'm going to make a folder called chair and table. Okay, chair and table, and I'm going to put the table in that folder. I'm going to lock the table because I don't want it to move. Sorry about that. Okay. So what we're going to do is go back in, and we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to put a candle or something on the table so that we have more light source, even though we already have this torch over here. So maybe I'll put a lantern or something on the table. So I'm going to go to the assets. So again, I'm in the layer tool. I'm going to drag and drop this candle here. That's in the assets tool here. I'm in the images assets. Okay, so it says that this candle is going to be scaled to half a square. So we'll see what it looks like. I'm not sure what it's going to look like on this table, but we'll find out. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that on here. It's not bad, actually. And I'm going to hit Shift and move it so it's not perfectly centered. And now I got two of them. And I'm going to go to selection mode. I'm hitting Control because you see if I don't, it tries to go where it wants to go. And then I want to rotate it. There we go. The problem with rotating it is that this smoke here, or this smoke makes it look like there's wind coming from a certain direction. So that's something that maybe I'll leave that the way it is. Now that I have those placed and they're in the chair and table selection, I'll lock them. Now I'm going to grab a chair. So again, I'm going to go drag it to the tile area. I'm going to probably stick it up here just to make it easier, but if you want to rotate it at this point, you can. So maybe you want it coming from this direction. So we could stick it back here. So when someone comes in the door, we can stare at them. So now that that's there, I'm going to go ahead and click on the map. It says I'm going to place the tile. And you can see it's scaled to 8, not 0.8. So if you want to delete this, go to selection mode, make sure you're on that layer, and hit delete. And that will take care of it. So what I was trying to tell you earlier is that you can scale these before you place them. And I thought it said 0.8, not 8. So I'm going to drag this over again. And you can see it says 8. So I want 0.8. Actually, I'm just going to go with 1. I'm going to rotate it again. And now I'm going to place it. And it's a little small. You can see that. So if you want to adjust that, you go to the selection mode, make sure you're on the chair layer, select it, and then rotate it, or in this case, I'm going to bring it up to 2. All right, that's a little better. So now I'm going to move it, but I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Alt key so I'm not stuck with snapping to grid. So I'm going to set it there, and then I'm going to take and move the layer down so it doesn't look like it's on top of the table. So I'm going to put the chair under the table by dragging the layer down. And being that this is so transparent, I'm going to have to fix that by going to the table itself, and then I'm going to go back to the tint, and I'm going to turn up the opacity so that you can't see the chair through there. There we go. So that is basically placing all this together. Now, what's handy about this is I can lock this layer and I can move this whole thing as an asset instead of one little piece at a time. So right now it's locked. So I have to go in and unlock all the pieces to this layer. And now I have this selected. Everything has to be unlocked before I can move it. And now you can move this as a whole. So you're not confined with, with just one, moving everything as individual pieces. So now this is a whole segment of things. And then I can just lock that for so I don't move the whole table. Now you were talking about a mimic. So not sure how I want to illustrate that. But if I was going to do something like that, first of all, I don't want to get too deep into this, but if I had like a monster manual loaded or any of those kind of books, I would pick a mimic NPC, I would build the encounter, and then I would link it to the map. And then I would also use this table as a token for the actual creature. So when you're fighting it, you can move the asset, and then you can hide this layer. So if you were, you spring the trap on your players, use a token that's roughly this size, and use that to use the exact same picture, but as a token. So in your assets, you would make a copy of that table, and you would put it in the tokens area, and then that would be selectable when you make your NPC. You can swap out you can use this as your token, or you can use a copy of this as your token. When it comes time, you place your token or your encounter on top of the table. Then when it comes time to fight, you would hide this layer here, the visibility of this table. So this is the chair and table, or the combo here. So you can change the visibility so that it's no longer visible to your players, and your token, when you enact your encounter, your token would show up here instead. So you could do that. You can make an elaborate encounter that way. So does that make sense? It's a little work, but it can be done. Everybody good with that? Okay. So that's basically how you manipulate the layers and use them to your advantage. So let's see what this looks like. I haven't put the candle light on here, so I'll finish that now. So I'll go to light mode, which is lighting. I'm going to go down to your preset here, and so I want to select the actual light, and I'm going to pick the candle, and it automatically changes the color back to a standard color. And then I'm just going to assign those to the candles. So I'm going to open up the chair and table. Here are the candles. And I'm going to click on each candle to give them the light effect. And now that that's there, I'm going to lock it. Lock and load, and close that. And now I'm going to recenter the map, and I'm going to go back to play mode and take a look at some of these changes that I made. So there's the table with the candlelight and with the weird torchlight, and you can see the flicker coming off the table. So is there any questions about this? So that is some things that you could do to make your maps more interesting, and you can apply different effects and bring in different assets. So we brought in a third-party map and dressed it up with the DunGen app, and that'll be in the description at the end of the show. And then as far as Fantasy Grounds goes, you can use this to great effect. I mean, once you get used to using the tools and how they work, it goes quicker, and you're not explaining it. Like, we're into 2 hours right now. So explaining all this takes longer actually than actually doing it. So on the top, well, that's why we're here though. So on the very top, you have these titles. So this says DunGen.whatever original small. You can change this description, but don't change it in the file description. So what I'm going to do is call this map, comma, we'll say magic fountain room or something. And then on the left, I'm just going to call it DunGen. There's no rhyme or reason to it. When I share this map, I'm going to go ahead and click this identification so that when I share it to my players, they're only going to see the DunGen description. They're not going to see the actual name of the file or the name of the renamed, call it Magic Fountain. And then when you right click and hit share, and you're going to hit share record, your players will see this, but they won't see necessarily all the assets. Because if I select the token, you're only going to be able to see that much. So that's basically what the player would see. And then if I want to move this player over to the beginning area and not worry about the walls and the line of sight, I'm going to hit shift and just drag them over. That way you can move it without getting hung up on the walls. So you can still see a little bit of the torch light there. So you can't move through walls. So you have to hit the shift key if you want to allow your players to move through a wall. But that would be for convenience, not so much gameplay. So that is basically, in a nutshell, one way to use Fantasy Grounds. So we went from the tool into the map tools, into using assets, applying lights, applying effects, and organizing and grouping them. So this is important to maintain this kind of organization. And then when you want to turn on or off lights, you have that toggle here. And I'm going to go ahead and unselect. There we go. So now you can turn off. There's the fountain light. So that actually belongs in the fountain area. So you have all these different groups here for different reasons. So if I go into the chair and table thing, I can turn off those candles. So that's up to you how you want to present your map to your players. And that's what really Fantasy Grounds is, just a way to present things. You present text, you present images, you tell your story around that. You select what type of lighting or, what do you want to present to them? That's what it comes down to when you're doing a session. You may not even get to all this. Maybe in the first part of this campaign or this game or a one-shot, maybe you're just going to get to this first part. So you don't have to have all this set up ahead of time. if you don't plan on going much further. So just remember that you don't have to do this all at once, but when you're working with tools like lighting and such, it's easier to do it at once. You can do it as you go, but I recommend doing it like getting all the assets placed, and if you can. You may not have that time, so you may just have to use this area without lighting. So it's just up to you how you want to run things. But to break this down, we had an easier way to get line of sight put on using the map tools. And then we had more time to play around with effects and these colored assets and stuff. So I like the tool. I think it's a good tool. It's got a few flaws, and there's things about it that you may or may not like, but I think it's a good tool overall. And it's nice that Nick has provided me with a free license to use with the college, not for commercial use, but just for teaching. And then he's given me the ability to assign keys to people who want to use the app if they're taking the lessons and such. So I'm not going to give out the licenses or the usage for nothing. I mean, if you're taking the courses, I'll definitely hook you up. But yeah, so he has a Patreon. It's DunGen, DunGen.app. So if you look for that in the there's in the description, I'll have the direct links to it. But if you want to check this tool out, it's a very simple tool, and it's not as complicated. You can use other stuff, like there's other third-party tools that do something similar. They might be a little bit more advanced, but I think this is great for homebrew and for on the fly and for developers. So is there any questions or comments that you guys would like to make before we start wrapping this up? Maybe there's something we want to go over and cover. No, not one, huh? Okay, so that was a big 2-hour information dump. We do teach the Map Tool 101 class at least once a month. Keep an eye on the calendar if you want to take the class again, and we won't have all this extra in the beginning, but the main thing is getting a grid on the map, understanding how the tool works. So working with layers, making sure that you're in the correct tool. So when you're manipulating Fantasy Grounds, you're not getting mad and stuck and everything else. You're like a lot of times it's just a matter of being in the selection tool. When you want to manipulate or move something, use the selection tool. Try not to leave yourself. Like if you're in tile mode and you want to put more chairs down, that's fine. But when you're done, switch over to selection mode, because that's what's going to mess you up. Because then you're going to try to change one of those chairs. Like maybe you want to rotate it or something. And all it's going to do is make you frustrated. So make sure that you use the tool and understand and practice with it, and then it just becomes second nature after a while. It's not going to happen overnight. There's no easy button. You got to put some time in. You got to understand where things are at and be able to switch between the tools without too much issue. And it'll take a little while. So I'm still learning myself. I mean, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. You saw all that fumbling around I did in the beginning. So it's very easy to mess these things up. So just like this ended up being a wreck. So I had made a mistake, but when you have these points, you can actually drag and drop them. You don't have to redraw them. So all that mess I made, I can fix it with just moving a few points. Like this here, I can just take this and extend that line. So that's kind of what makes this type of map interesting. See, these aren't connected. So there we go. And if you don't want this, you can just single click and delete it. There's the extra lines gone. So it didn't take much to fix that. It just takes a little patience and understanding how the tool works. See, now I just took out that whole line. And I notice Control Z isn't back, so now I'd have to actually draw a line. So I go back to the line tool, go back to wall, single click, You hit escape or double click to get out of the drawing mode. There you go. So it's not too bad to fix that. So like here, if you wanted to make this a secret door, you could. So that you can go to the secret door mode and you can draw in your door. So let's say it's a rectangle. There's your secret door. And then I'm going to go back to the line tool and draw this line through here. And now I have to make sure I'm in the wall tool because I was stuck in the door tool. So I almost screwed up. Now I just double click. There's that. Go back to select mode. Selected all those points. Hit delete. So there's the, that's how you get rid of the lines inside here. So that's your secret door tool. You could have a pit, so you can put an asset in here, like maybe a 20 by 20 square. You can actually draw it in too if you wanted to, and then put the pit tool asset, and then if the players walk over it, they fall in, and they can only see the light that's inside of the pit, and they can't move out unless you allow it. So there's all kinds of cool things you can do. Just got to get used to what the tools can do and the capabilities, and what their weaknesses, the shortcomings, and the bonuses are. So hopefully that gives you guys a little insight on some of this tool. So is there any questions or comments?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
Is there any way to determine like area effect for spells?
Yeah, kind of. Like to determine an area of effect, you basically need to look up the spell if you don't know. So if you own the content of whatever rule set you're in, look up the spell, find out what the actual text says, and then draw that in, and you can make it a kind of a transparency. So it doesn't even have to have color necessarily, but you still have the mask, right? And then you can assign light to it if you have to, or whatever it is, but you can make your own custom spells. So I can cover that a little bit. So if you go into Fantasy Grounds and you go into the light tool, when you get into the map tool area, if you go into the lights or the lighting area, you can create new presets for yourself by going up here into the effects area. So here's the effects. You can make a custom effect. So basically these are conditions and these are lighting effects. So if you click on the add item and you go into here, you can actually add custom effects, or you can come into the tool itself and go into, let's see, and it's token lighting, if I remember right. And then you can change the different aspects of it, and it will save it as a preset. And then you'll be able to use that, and it will show up in your menu when you go up to your, for this area, it'll show up here as a preset. So you can add your own presets by creating them in here. And you have to be in, I think it's Token Vision or Token Light, one of these two tools. And then it will create a shortcut for you to apply when you need to based on the spell. And then you can also code that if you understand how to do that. You can put those parameters in your spells on your actions tab, and it will add you can add a lighting basically code. So when you activate the spell, you can also activate the lighting in one, not one click, but it'll be two. But basically you can add it, and it will add to either you, or you drag it to your target, depending on how you have it set up. But there are ways to set up your preset lighting without, but you have to know and look up the spell. There's no way to, pick a spell and it already sets everything up. You have to know what the spell is. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Okay. Thanks.
So, yeah, so you'd have to have the content. So you'd have to have the SRD or, you know, if you play Pathfinder, you'd have to have the core rules and look that up, and then you would set that up based on those parameters. There isn't a preset for lighting for spells usually, except for the light spell. That has one. So you can model after that preset and build from there. So that'd just be a matter of changing the color and maybe the light range and the dimness. Also, you know, having those as presets will make it faster for you. So if you have a wizard and he has a lot of flashy kind of spells, you could technically set all those up ahead of time if you knew like you said, you'd look up all that stuff. It's a lot of work, but once it's done, it's a done deal. So it's just a one-time setup, but it does take a little bit, especially if you have multiple spells that have lighting effects. Okay, anything else? Anybody else want to jump in and make some comments or complaint?
No complaints. I do love what you did with the water. I had no idea the effects could be used that way.
Yeah, it's kind of a
interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a tertiary, you know, thing to do with it. I mean, you can make it, you know, more alive, and you know, it's one of those things that this is actually not that great because I think that I think the mist is kind of overkill. I think that's ruining the effect. So if I turn that off, you can turn off the mist, and that kind of just gives you that, but it gives you less movement. So that's why I put that on there. So it gives it more life and movement instead of just being stagnant. So that's, you know, just kind of something I learned along the way. And, you know, it's nice because you can turn on or off. So, you know, you can actually turn the water layers off if you wanted to. You can empty the bowl. So it's up to you how you want to. And I like the idea that you can turn off the lights like a light switch. You know, that's pretty cool. So you don't have to go in individually and turn off each one unless you set it up that way. So there's your dungeon layer is on the bottom, and then all your other stuff is on top. And then within these folders, you have to make sure that these are in the correct stacked order. Otherwise, you'll have a chair floating in space. And so you got to, you know, if you're not familiar with layers, that's what you need to do. So I think that's good. I think I've rambled for over 2 hours. So I think I'll call it a stream and call it a day. Thanks, Nick. I want to do this again, but not until, of course, you have some more content. And if you need any help in the future with your patron promotion or anything like that, let us know. We'll help you out.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions for Nick before he leaves? Going once, going twice. Okay, Nick, you're free to go. Yeah, anybody that wants to stick around with me, I'm going to turn the stream off, but if you guys want to set up the keys for your usage so you can practice, definitely I'll hook you up with that. Nick provided me with instructions on how to do it, so you guys want to use the tool beyond this class, and you're not subjected to patron, so you're welcome to do that for the class. So anybody out there in computer land, I want to say goodbye. Thanks for joining us. This will be up on the YouTube channel and in Twitch with all the links there, and also in you got Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. So regardless of where you're at, you should be able to see it. So take care, everybody.